All right, as we say tonight, focusing on the deepening power crisis. Just before we get into the politics, let's remind you of the stages of rolling blackouts. As you can see on your screens, we've recently been hit by stage 6, which is meant to be 10 hours, but some households were in the dark for nearly 12 hours, which begs the question for some, was it really stage 6? Some seem to doubt this particular stage. So really, this is what we are being subjected to when it comes to the stages during the day. Now, a lot has been said as well about the politics and the impact that this has had on the Eskom crisis from different voices, public fights, and what looks like an internal battle. So what has been the impact of politics when it comes to what we are seeing now? As you can see, the front page of the Mail and Guardian also laying bare what we have seen happening and over time. And this is taking us back to where it all began, the different role players, the politics thereof, what also happened in Parliament. Let's look at this further now. We're joined by Business Day political editor Hadra Omarjee, David Ansara, Chief Executive of Free Market Foundation. We also have political analyst Dr. Levi Ndo and spokesperson of Quebec Alliance, Peter Becker. Thank you so much to you all for your time. I'll begin with you, Hadra. The President on Sunday and Monday in the Free State in KwaZulu-Natal, taking us back in history, saying to us it started in 1998. We didn't heed the calls. How much of what we are seeing today is as a result of politics?
You know, I listened to the President very, very closely when he spoke on Sunday night at the ANC Free State Conference, and he sounded far removed from reality. In fact, he kept going on about the unity of the ANC, all this in the context of where we are discussing a cabinet reshuffle. And I'll put it quite directly to say, this is not the same as COVID-19, where we were building the ship as we were sailing it. This is a problem we've been saddled with since 1998, load shedding since 2008. It is a problem of the ANC's own making. And if the President does not soon get a reality check, I'll put to you that the ANC's internal polling says it is going to drop to about 40% in the 2024 general elections. So I think all of this needs to be properly considered as the President considers a cabinet reshuffle, because essentially what happens when he reshuffles his executive is going to decide the trajectory of the country, and it could well seal the ANC's fate.
And Hadra, I'm coming back to that, especially in the context of what we saw in the City Press on Sunday. David, I'd like to bring you into this conversation. When it comes to really what Hadra is saying is that it looks like those in power, and I'm using the governing party here as an example, are far removed from the situation. Are they speaking with authority?
No, I'm afraid they don't have very much authority in the eyes of the electorate and the public in general anymore, as has been pointed out. And I think fundamentally what we need to understand here is that the problems at Eskom are not necessarily technical, they are political in nature. They arise from a over-centralization of state control over the utility, political incentives that have been brought to bear on that utility. So in terms of controlling procurement policies and imposing race-based procurement policies there, that has been abused, as Andre de Ruyter has pointed out. That has allowed, to quote Mr. de Ruyter, non-value-adding intermediaries to interpose themselves on value chains. That has opened up the space for incredible abuse and wastage and inefficiency. There is also now this ongoing question of liberalizing generation capacity. That needs to be vastly ramped up. And we at the Free Market Foundation would advocate for a privatization, particularly of generation capacity. Some of these assets are now nearing the end of their life. They could still realize some value in the hands of capable private operators. So we are really at the 11th hour here in terms of our ability to capture some of that residual value. So political problems require political solutions, and that means getting the politicians as far away from Eskom as possible.
I'm going to come back to that because I want to know what as far away looks like, particularly when if they can argue that they are the shareholder. But I'm coming back to you, David, in just a moment. Peter, there is something that we often hear, and even the SIU now looking into it, the issue of sabotage. How much of this as well is also a part of politics? Because we're now seeing in the public domain reports suggesting that the CEO also says a lack of political will in this particular point to deal with it is also going to be disastrous.
Thank you. Just a small point. Since last week when I had a favorable court ruling, I'm no longer functioning as the spokesperson for the Coburg Alert. In terms of the reasons for this happening, I'm not an expert when it comes to sabotage, but I think it's clear to everyone that the problem has been a lack of planning. So we've seen disparate views within cabinet, and that is really the essence of the problem. Some people are saying renewables will work and it's the solution, and particularly from the DMRE, they're saying, no, we're going to fix this aging coal fleet. And I think it's really quite simple. If you've got a 40-year-old fleet, you're not going to repair it. It's a pipe dream to think we're going to get to 75%, this aspirational goal that's been set. And the essence of the problem we're in now is an obstructionism from the DMRE in terms of renewable rollout. We had a really successful potential program that was obstructed by people at Eskom, and in general, the DMRE is of the view that renewables don't work and it's not the solution. And that obviously flies in the face of science, experience around the world, and what all the experts are telling us.
I'm going to latch on to that and go to you, Dr. Ndou, because this has also been at the heart of what some have argued, that it's politics also laid bare in government when we look at what has been said between the Public Enterprises Minister and the Mineral Resources Minister. Quite some public statements of the two being so different, yet they come from the same political party.
Bongiwe, good afternoon. Good afternoon to my colleagues and the viewers at home. Indeed, this is politics. You need to look firstly at the processes and systems in the SOEs. Politicians get quite involved, especially when it comes to the appointment of the board members. To a certain extent, they also get involved in the appointment of those that are supposed to run these entities. And at the same time, you have a situation where, because of the apparent confusion that society has, you also have a situation where political leaders themselves would always be, or will also be, active participants in the confusion that is there in society relating to the availability of energy in South Africa. The differences that we've seen in the open space between Gwede Mantashe and Pravin Gordhan is something that should have been ironed out, in my view, at within closed doors, at a party level, and also at government level, not in the public space.
Dr. Ndou, before you continue, I'd like to ask a question then on that. Is it possible, though, looking at the ANC right now, the state that is is it possible for them to call these two deployees to order?
Well, it actually depends on the will that is there within the party and the extent in which they both would respond to other members calling them into order. But in a normal setup, you would expect the two to toe the party line and not actually throw stones at each other in public. But at the same time, you have a situation that has been created here by the politicians who have actually chosen to put people that will not take the entity forward, who would be seen to be very comfortable, even when the people that they've put into these entities are actually not performing.
Yeah.
But the most painful situation, it's when they've been given warnings for quite some time,
yes,
that there appears to be a crisis that is coming and they should actually play a role. And unfortunately, the advice that came in was actually not was actually not responded to by the politicians themselves.
And we're running out of time. I'd like to come to you, David. Dr. Ndou touches on something very important. The signals were there, warnings since 1998. But it doesn't look like everyone is taking responsibility instead of shifting it, but it looks like they're shifting the buck.
Yeah, I think that's quite right. And I think a lot of people have laid the blame for Eskom's failures at Eskom itself, at the door of Eskom itself. But I think that is perhaps unfair. I think we need to look at the political incentives that are operating around the utility. And there's going to be much speculation around who will replace Andre de Ruyter. But the fact of the matter remains is that it doesn't matter who replaces him, because the prevailing ideology of state control will still be in place. And ultimately, if the CEO doesn't have the authority to make the decisions necessary to put the utility back to operational order and financial good footing, then we're going to continue to see a worsening of these problems. So even, Elon Musk might get to Mars within our lifetimes. But even if you had to take Elon Musk and make him the CEO of Eskom, even he, with all of his business and engineering acumen, wouldn't be able to turn Eskom around. The problem is with the system itself, not necessarily with the capabilities of who is in charge. Ultimately, it's a political problem that we're dealing with here.
And it certainly really sounds like a hugely deep political problem, as you said, that needs a political solution. But Hajra, 2024 is just a couple of months away. How big of an election issue is this going to be?
Well, if you looked at e-tolls and Gauteng's roads, the ANC polling told them that they were going to be impacted in 2014. They didn't take that polling seriously, and they lost 10% in one election in Gauteng. The same in terms of the workers' vote in both Cape Town in 2006 as well as Nelson Mandela Bay in 2011. The ANC polling told them Jacob Zuma was unpopular in 2016 and 2019. The party didn't heed that advice and lost mass electoral support. So it really is facing an identity crisis. And the ANC behaves as though it doesn't have political power. And time is really running out for the party, because electoral trends show that the ANC is on track to lose its majority. Now, many in the ANC believe that they will only lose their majority by a slight margin, and thus will form a coalition with some smaller parties and get back into government. However, that is not represented by the data of the internal polling the ANC has, as well as previous election results. Load shedding, if e-tolls were a big issue, load shedding is a massive issue, and the ANC should be very concerned. I'm not here to argue for or against Pravin Gordhan. He's got a reform project to complete. I'm not here to argue for or against Gwede Mantashe. If he's not there, who handles NUMSA as well as NUM? Who better than a former NUM leader? But I think decisive action has got to be taken. And if load shedding is not resolved, I do think the ANC will pay a massive price in 2024. Perhaps that is good for democracy. My concern is, have we even started to look at what a post-ANC government looks like in South Africa? And I think that's the big question we need to think about going into next year's elections.
And Peter, listening to Hajra, decisive action is required. More power is needed to the grid. That is something that is urgent. How much of this, has also been really halted by politics, and that we are now sitting here not seeing power added to the grid?
Yes, and I'd like to support something one of the other speakers said. This is not a fault of Eskom. Eskom, well, at least partly. Eskom is not in charge of planning new capacity. Eskom does not have the legal right to build new capacity. That is very clearly set out in the Energy Regulation Act, and Section 34 says that it's the Minister for the DMRE who has to issue a determination for new plants to be built. And that has simply not been happening. Now, if you look at a pattern, there used to be a limit of 10 megawatts under which you could build it without approaching NERSA, the energy regulator. Then there was a lot of agitation from civil society and experts to raise that to 50 megawatts. And that didn't happen for a long time until the president came on the radio with the minister for the DMRE standing behind him and said, we're going to raise it to 100 megawatts, and basically forced the hand of the DMRE. Then there was a lot of call for Section 34 determination based on the IRP 2019, because there was a large amount of planned capacity, specifically in the renewable area, I think about 13 gigawatts, and there had been no determination issued for that. And again, a lot of pressure from civil society, from experts, and a lot of foot dragging from the DMRE until the president stepped in and instructed the DMRE to issue that determination. And that's finally been done. And the latest was to lift the 100 megawatt limit and let anyone go ahead and build capacity and allow that to be wheeled from the place of production to the place of consumption via the Eskom grid. Of course, we have some issues with grid capacity and so on, but the pattern here is clear that experts, civil society are asking for the same thing, unlock the renewable energy capacity in one way or another. And there are disagreements about IPPs or via Eskom, but those determinations and that new capacity is what's needed. And there's been consistent foot dragging from the DMRE, and the president has repeatedly had to step in and force the DMRE to take the right action. And that's a pattern we've seen, and I think that is what is needed going forward as well. We need action from our president to stop this bickering between cabinet.
And I've got about the final questions, about 20 seconds each as you answer. Dr. Ndou, some have said that it doesn't matter who comes on in to lead Eskom after Andre de Ruyter. That particular position is a poison chalice when they look at the politics. You agree?
Well, you need the political will. You need a highest degree of accountability. And you need people that have got skills and expertise to be able to run this entity, but they need all the necessary support that government can provide so that this entity can still stand on its feet.
And Hadra, when you look at then what we are being, taken back to now, a history class, but is the responsibility being taken over time? Have we seen heads roll? We've seen the State Capture Commission come, but it doesn't look like anything has happened.
Absolutely not. Look at the leadership that was elected at the ANC's national conference in December. It's as though the State Capture Commission never happened. It's as though, it was just there. We spent billions of rands to quell public outrage. On the issue specifically on Eskom and political responsibility for power blackouts, the worst and most severe this country has ever seen since load shedding started back in 2008. I've never been a fan of Andre de Ruyter. In fact, I'm 100% unapologetic for the transformation agenda in South Africa. However, I've been convinced by people I've spoken to in Eskom, as well as the Eskom board over the last few years, that he's a very good CEO. What he lacks is any political acumen. So failure for his ability to actually do what needs to be done has got to lie with the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, who's stood up, provided that support. De Ruyter himself has pointed to Gwede Mantashe to say he's not approved the licenses that needed to be approved 2 years back already, that perhaps could have led to less load shedding now. And then on the issue of security, very quickly, President Ramaphosa, when we spoke to him this month, had no idea of the intense security situation De Ruyter and other executives were facing. They literally wear bulletproof vests to the office, and De Ruyter found cyanide in his coffee.
And David, listening to that, you have said before a political problem which needs a political solution. So how does then, you think about not only Andre de Ruyter, Hadra, you're thinking about Phakamani Hadebe, who spoke about this position and how much toll it took on his health. David, how then does the shareholder begin to balance its interests as well as making sure that this particular entity does its job? In about 20 seconds.
Well, the problem is that there is only one single shareholder. We need to break the stranglehold that government has over electricity in this country. The same politicians who got us into this crisis are not the ones who are going to get us out of it. We need a new start post-2024. We need a radical overhaul of energy policy in South Africa, and that may include looking at liberalizing and floating the price of electricity in South Africa. These NERSA applications, it is a stitch-up between NERSA and Eskom. Consumers are completely helpless. They cannot procure power elsewhere. prices are fixed and there's nothing that you as a consumer can do about it. We would have far more efficiencies introduced into the process that might result in a short-term spike in energy prices. But what we would see is prices acting as a signal of the underlying value, and that would draw in private capital and private developers to start providing more energy. At the moment, the state is obstructing the private sector, and that is what is leading to this prolonged crisis. Your final thoughts, Peter, 10 seconds.
I think we need to look at what practical steps can happen immediately. And one thing, for example, is demand-side management. Do we really need hot water geysers on in all government buildings? Imagine the saving, the reduction in demand that could be done if the people working at the DMRE could wash their hands in cold water. And another thing that could be done is at the very worst time, the Coburg plant has been taken offline to do long-term refurbishment. And we need that gigawatt right now. And we could reduce load shedding by one stage for the next 12 months if we postponed or cancelled that refurbishment.
Thank you so much to you all for your time. Just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot to scratch when it comes to this particular issue and the politics thereof. But let me thank you all for your time. That was political editor at the Business Day, Haja Umarji, David and Sarah, Chief Executive of Free Market Foundation. Also political analyst, Dr. Levi Ndo, spokesperson of former spokesperson of Coburg Alliance, Peter Becker. Thank you so much to you all for your time. Well, the politics appear to be really at the heart of what we are seeing. So what then becomes, that one thing that moves the needle in this particular regard?